My name is Eliana Mercer, and what I'm about to share with you changed my life forever. The date was March 17th, 2018, a day that started like any other, but ended with an experience that would shake me to my core. I never imagined that I would face death that day, nor did I expect to return with a message so urgent that I couldn't ignore it. What I witnessed was terrifying, but I know in my heart that God chose me to share this warning so that others can be prepared for what's to come. During my near-death experience, Jesus revealed to me a vision of the future, a world very different from the one we know today. In this vision, society had changed drastically. People were living in fear, desperate to survive in a world filled with chaos and uncertainty. Natural disasters had intensified, economies had crumbled, and governments struggled to maintain control. Amid this turmoil, a new system emerged, one that promised stability, security, and peace. But beneath its comforting exterior lay something far more dangerous. Jesus showed me that this new system was not just about politics or money, it was deeply spiritual. Those who chose to embrace it unknowingly turned away from God. The system centered around something called the mark of the beast, and those who refused to accept it paid a terrible price. Families were torn apart, parents turned against their children, and lifelong friendships ended in bitterness. I saw people who resisted the mark being labeled as dangerous extremists, accused of standing in the way of progress. Society viewed them as selfish, stubborn, and even evil, all because they refused to take part in what seemed like an innocent system of control. The pressure to conform was immense. Those who rejected the mark lost everything: their jobs, their homes, and even access to food and medical care. Some were shamed publicly, their faces displayed on screens warning others to avoid them. These people weren't criminals, they were faithful believers who refused to compromise their devotion to God. Watching their suffering was heartbreaking, but what struck me most was how easily others turned on them, friends betraying friends, family members cutting ties out of fear. The world had become a place where standing for your faith meant standing alone. As Jesus continued to show me what lay ahead, my heart grew heavy. The vision shifted, and I saw how deeply technology was woven into this new system. It started with digital currency. Cash had become a thing of the past. Every financial transaction was tracked, and people could no longer buy or sell without being part of this new digital network. At first, it seemed harmless, even helpful. People believed it made life easier, safer, and more organized. But beneath that convenience was something far more sinister. The digital system gave those in power total control. If someone spoke out against the system or refused to comply, their accounts would be frozen instantly. I saw people unable to purchase groceries, pay their bills, or even access public transportation, all because they refused to conform. It was terrifying to watch as entire families became desperate, begging strangers for food because they had no other way to survive. People who once lived comfortably were reduced to outcasts simply because they would not align themselves with the system. Biometric identification was another piece of the system, and it felt even more invasive. Fingerprints, facial scans, and even DNA data were required to access healthcare, education, and employment. At first, people welcomed these measures, believing they added security and convenience. But the truth was that it stripped people of their privacy and their freedom. Every action, every movement was monitored. People couldn't even enter a grocery store without being scanned and logged into the system. Those who refused this identification found themselves locked out of society entirely. The most chilling part was the introduction of social credit scores. Everyone was assigned a score based on their behavior, beliefs, and willingness to comply with the system's rules. People with high scores received benefits, better jobs, priority medical care, and access to resources. But those who refused to follow the system's agenda were punished. I watched as faithful believers were deliberately given low scores, cutting them off from basic needs. They were treated as outcasts, unable to work, shop, or even find shelter. The world seemed to have turned cold, and compassion was nowhere to be found. As I stood there in the vision, I realized that the systems I was seeing weren't just random ideas, they were all connected, carefully designed to lead people into accepting something far more dangerous. Jesus showed me how these digital currencies, biometric scans, and social credit systems were merely stepping stones to prepare humanity for the mark of the beast. The mark itself wasn't just a physical sign or implant. It was a declaration of allegiance, a choice to submit fully to the system and the Antichrist who controlled it. What terrified me most was how deceptively this mark was introduced. It wasn't forced upon people in an obvious way. Instead, it was marketed as the final step toward a better world. Leaders claimed it would end poverty, improve healthcare, and create global unity. The media celebrated this new system as a breakthrough that would bring humanity together, and even trusted religious leaders praised it as a sign of peace and progress. Many who once stood firm in their faith were drawn in by these promises, convinced they were doing what was right. I saw families sitting together, discussing whether they should take the mark. Some parents encouraged their children to accept it, believing it was the only way to survive. Others, with tears in their eyes, begged their loved ones to resist, warning that this wasn't just a political choice, but a spiritual one. I watched as mothers and fathers pleaded with their children not to fall for the deception, only to be mocked and ignored. The pain on their faces was something I'll never forget. Even more painful was watching people I knew to be strong believers falter under pressure. Some had spent years preparing for hard times, storing food, gathering supplies, and planning ways to survive off the grid, yet they hadn't prepared their hearts. When faced with the threat of losing their jobs, their homes, or even their families, they gave in. I saw the heartbreak in their eyes as they realized too late what they had done, that they had traded their faith for temporary security. As the vision continued, I saw how those who refused the mark suffered deeply. Life became incredibly difficult for them. Without the mark, they couldn't buy food, pay their bills, or even access medical care. Parents struggled to feed their children, relying on what little they could grow or trade with others who also refused to take the mark. Some were forced to leave their homes, living in hidden places just to survive. I saw groups of believers gathering in secret, praying together and encouraging one another to stay strong despite the overwhelming fear they faced. The media painted these people as dangerous threats to society. News anchors described them as selfish, stubborn individuals standing in the way of peace and progress. Their faces were broadcast publicly, with messages urging others to report them if they were seen. I watched as neighbors, even friends and family members, turned on one another out of fear. Some did it willingly, believing they were protecting society, while others betrayed their loved ones simply to improve their own social credit scores. The hardest part to witness was the heartbreak these faithful believers endured. I saw parents separated from their children, husbands and wives divided because one had chosen the mark and the other refused. The pain on their faces was unbearable, tears streaming down their cheeks as they tried to stay faithful to God, even when it felt like the whole world was against them. Some were arrested, Others were dragged from their homes, and many disappeared without a trace. But Jesus showed me something else, something that filled me with hope. Those who stood firm, no matter how much they suffered, were never alone. I saw angels surrounding them, giving them strength when they felt weak. Their faith, though tested by hunger, isolation, and fear, burned brighter than ever before. They held on to the promise that no matter what happened in this world, their souls belonged to God, and that promise gave them the courage to keep going. In the final part of my vision, Jesus showed me how the deception surrounding the mark would become so powerful that even some churches would be misled. I saw pastors and spiritual leaders standing before their congregations, encouraging people to accept the mark. They claimed it was harmless, just another step toward peace and stability. Some even twisted scripture, convincing their followers that God would understand if they compromised just to survive. These leaders believed they were helping their people, but in reality, they were guiding them straight into spiritual bondage. I witnessed entire communities falling into this deception. People who once had strong faith began to justify their decision to take the mark, telling themselves that God would forgive them. They believed that accepting it was the only way to protect their families and avoid suffering. But Jesus made it clear to me that this choice was far more than a matter of survival. It was a spiritual test, one that required absolute trust in Him. The most heartbreaking part was watching those who had accepted the mark realize too late what they had done. I saw some fall to their knees in despair, crying out to God, but the weight of their decision seemed unbearable. They had chosen comfort over faith, and their souls carried the burden of that choice. The grief they experienced was unlike anything I had ever seen, a kind of emptiness that no words can describe. But Jesus also showed me those who remained faithful, even in the face of terrible suffering. I saw families who refused to compromise, choosing instead to trust God for their provision. They lived humbly, often hiding to avoid persecution, yet their faith never wavered. Despite their struggles, there was a peace that surrounded them, a peace that could only come from knowing they had chosen to stand with Christ, no matter the cost. Before my vision ended, Jesus looked at me with eyes filled with love and urgency. "Tell them," He said. "Tell my children to prepare, not just with food and supplies, but with unwavering faith. They must know my voice and trust me above all else. Those who stand firm will be saved." When I awoke, I felt like my heart had been shattered, not just because of what I had seen, but because I knew how easily people could fall into the trap of believing the system was good. I realized that the greatest protection we can have is a strong relationship with Jesus, a faith so deeply rooted that no fear, no hunger, and no threat can shake it. I'm sharing this story not to scare you, but to prepare you. Jesus showed me these things because He loves us and He wants us to be ready. Please, don't wait until the pressure comes. Strengthen your faith now. Seek Him now. The time will come when standing for Christ will cost us everything, and when that moment arrives, we must be willing to stand firm, no matter what. If you've never given your life to Jesus, I urge you to do it now. Surrender your heart to Him, seek His guidance, and trust Him completely. He will give you the strength to endure, and His promises will never fail. Please share this message with others. Let your friends, your family, and your community know what's coming, because when the time comes, we must stand together in unwavering faith.